it never dawned on me that music wouldn't be my life. I wanted to include other things. I mean, I really wanted to play third base for the Dodgers. That was not in the cards.
Hi everyone, welcome to OSA Backstage. I'm Dani Meyer, this is my cold voice, and on today's episode, Serena and I are talking to Maestro Stephen White. He is the principal guest conductor of Opera Omaha and the maestro for our upcoming production of Susannah, which takes the stage January 30th and February 1st, just a few weeks. Stephen is a joy. It's so infectious to talk with someone who, it doesn't seem to matter at what point they're in with their career. They're just so happy to be there and so happy to be making music. I think this podcast could have lasted 3 more hours than it actually did. You're going to enjoy every minute of it. Susannah is a very emotional, beautiful opera. It's based on a story in the book of Daniel. It's a very old story, but it's a very gorgeous, gorgeous American opera written by someone who Stephen will talk about was so unknown and came out with one of the greatest, not just American operas, but operas of the 20th century. You're going to love this interview. I hope you come out and see Opera Omaha's production of Susannah, January 30, February 1st. Enjoy. Well, nice, simple operas. You keep getting the nice, simple operas, Maestro.
Well, there's no such thing as a simple opera, and then on the other hand, there's no such thing as an impossible opera or any other kind of piece. I mean, everything goes into preparation. Regardless of whether it's something looks easy on the page. It's something that looks easy on the page. If you're not well prepared, suddenly can become a disaster. And then something that looks very difficult on the page, you're motivated to prepare. And I think the same thing goes with players in the orchestra. When they know they've got a difficult piece, they spend time preparing. So it basically comes down to execution and inspiration.
I think, honestly, the hardest things, the comfort of being surrounded by other people immediately makes that feel much, much better. Like we did Mozart 35 last season, and I was sweating bullets because that's a huge bass excerpt.
Of course.
And then they put me right behind the viola section, and I have the 2 nicest violas in the universe. You have Sarah Curley and Judy Divis, and I remember thinking, it's like, oh, they won't make fun of me if I mess up, and this will be.
I can't imagine Judy making fun of anybody. What a sweetheart, and I love Judy.
She'd find a bass joke at some point, but in the moment, she would be very kind. But would you please introduce yourself? Most of us, I think, know you, but just to be formal about it.
Sure. I am Stephen White. I am the principal guest conductor here at Opera Omaha. And as such, I've conducted 10 operas here with the company over the years, and a couple of concerts actually with the symphony. And it, a large part of my satisfaction and reward working here at the opera company is working with this great orchestra. It's been a pleasure from the very first time I stepped in front of them, and it always is. It's they challenge me, I challenge them, and they always do such beautiful work.
Thank you very much. We've been so fortunate. We have a number of guest conductors, regular guest conductors for the opera, and it's just a thrill to have you back each time, because this is repertoire that we just don't get to tackle like this very often. And we're here today to talk about Susannah, which is incredible and also extraordinarily devastating, the complete opposite of The Barber of Seville, which we did in the fall.
Right.
But first, would you tell us, where did music start for you? Was it at home, at school, the concert hall, all the above?
I'm one of those really fortunate persons who was surrounded by music in my home. Both my parents were classical musicians. My father was a pianist and a musicologist, PhD in musicology, so I was, and my mother was an opera singer and a voice teacher. And so I didn't know there was anything other than classical music growing up. I tell people that didn't make me talented. It didn't make me more intelligent. It's just that my environment I was saturated with classical music, and you know, I don't remember a time in my life when I didn't have it. Someone said, "What's the first piece of classical music you can remember?" Um, and I remember playing. My father was my first piano teacher, and I remember some of the very early Mozart Minuet in F that I remember playing at 4 years old or 5 years old. Not playing it well, particularly when you consider that's about how old Mozart was when he composed it. But I remember the thing that just exhilarated me more than anything else was the William Tell Overture, because I was also a Lone Ranger fan. And when I would watch The Lone Ranger and have the William Tell Overture come on, I mean, that was the most exhilarating music. And then for a while, when I was a child, I would proclaim that Rossini was my favorite composer, and I would have to justify that when people said, "Well, really, what? Tell me why." I said, "Well, because of the William Tell Overture." "What else do you know of Rossini?" "Nothing." Did he write anything else?" I had no idea. And then I very soon thereafter, I fell in love with Bach, particularly the Brandenburg concertos. And I remember for my 10th birthday, I was begging my parents for a tape recorder. This is way before CDs and that kind of thing. And I wanted a tape recorder so that I could tape from a record performance of Brandenburg Concerto Number 5 and take it with me everywhere I went. And so Brandenburg Concerto Number 5 became my theme song when I was 10 years old. And actually, it was a good choice. I mean, I still consider it to be perhaps the greatest orchestral piece of the first half of the 18th century. And it's just, that kind of perfection. But like I say, I was lucky to have music surrounding me as a child.
What did your parents, when you would say Rossini's my favorite, did either of your parents react in any way, or did they just like, we're just going to let this ride out?
Well, it's funny because in so many ways I am like my father. So for my father, I think it was a constant conversation. I remember when my dad was in graduate school, University of Wisconsin, and he was taking a course in the Ring of Wagner, the whole graduate course of the Ring of the Nibelung, and he would bring home these excerpts and just now, look, here come the giants. I mean, to me, as a child, and oh, this is the sword, and then tell me the story to a degree, but much less interested. I was much less interested in the stories as I was in the sheer exhilaration of the music. And even my first approaches to opera as a young person, maybe my first real interest in opera in terms of becoming something that I wanted to pursue in conjunction with all my other musical pursuits. I wasn't so interested in the stories. I listened to Tosca, I listened to La Boheme, and I would, listen to Rigoletto. And yes, the stories were interesting to me, but the music just absolutely blew me away. And that's not necessarily the right approach or the only approach to, for people to learn opera. Obviously, you want it to be a holistic kind of thing and understand the story and understand the text and the language. But for me, the thing that makes these operas great, first and foremost, is the music. There are very few great operas that are great dramatically but mediocre musically. There are a whole number of great operas that are great musically and perhaps mediocre dramatically. The greatest operas are great in both areas.
Do you feel like you started with the music because you didn't have to know the story to appreciate it? I mean, because some of these operas are universal. We're going to talk, like I said, Susannah has a very, very, very old story, but there are stories in opera that are essentially, that might be above people's heads for a long time. So do you feel like the music spoke to you well before you had to deal with the story, because the story almost didn't matter? Or do you feel like you came to...
Well, in certain respects, for example, I'll take Tosca as an example. I didn't know Italian when I first became involved with Tosca. I would read the story, and they would become, Mario Cavaradossi was a hero of mine. When I was 12 years old, I wanted to be Placido Domingo. But but truly, it really is the music. I mean, and so for example, we've all heard of things like Puccini without words or Wagner without words, um, and and that's because the music itself of these great masters, the operas that we're talking about, is so very transcendent. And of course, the more you know about the text and the situation and the stories, many of which are quite adult, so not necessarily appropriate. I mean, take Susannah for example. I mean, Susannah is an adult story. Doesn't mean that young people can't learn from it and be inspired by it and be moved by it. But the subject matter is quite adult. But the music, to me, always, and this is why I guess this is why I love being a conductor of opera. Um, uh, it is the music that supports the great drama. And it's not ever that you have to choose between one or the other. There's this ancient debate: is it the words or is it the music? There's Richard Strauss wrote an entire opera, Capriccia, based on the debate between whether it's the words that are the most important or it's the music that's most important. And the fact is, it's all important. I mean, it's all. That's why opera is such a great art form. But the approach. I don't want to give the impression that opera is the only thing that I'm interested or have opinions about, or the only thing I conduct. I mean, I really feel as though there is aesthetic content that goes beyond the notes on the page in everything that we do. One of my great experiences, one of the things that I love the most, working here in Omaha, was times several years ago. I can't remember how many years ago it is now, but maybe 9 years ago or something like that. I did the Symphonie Fantastique with the Omaha Symphony. And of course, in a piece like that and so many other great pieces, there's so much content, there's so much meaning that goes along with the music, that the more you explore and the more you sink yourself into it, it is a totality of an emotional connection that, in the case of opera, in the case of sung music, sometimes includes words and a story. But even a complete and total artwork like, say, Beethoven 5 or Brahms 3 or another piece that we don't associate necessarily with a program. There's got to be content that resonates not only with you as a conductor, but also with the musicians, and that hopefully resonates with the audience. I mean, it's a cliche, but it is absolutely true that music is the universal language. It's not necessarily translatable by Google, equally for everybody. Just like all other languages, some things are lost in translation. But music has a language. Music is a language, and it's up to us to find the meaning and to convey that meaning with our intent.
Fantastic. I also think I want to put a quick pin in this. When you have an opera like Susannah, when you have the composer is also the librettist, which
Yes.
also feels very rare. You
Yeah.
do feel like he's in a unique position where he can literally transcribe every word to every single note and know that it comes from the
Exactly.
same source. Before we get to that,
Okay.
when did you turn from a 10-year-old trying to record Brandenburg 5 on your tape player to deciding that music was going to be life, or was that just always going to be the road?
It never dawned on me that music wouldn't be my life. I wanted to include other things. I mean, I really wanted to play third base for the Dodgers. That was not in the cards. But I thought I could combine the two. I could conduct or sing the national anthem before the game, and then go play third base and all that. So I was more well-rounded than just the little musical geek. But I always knew that I wanted to be a professional musician. What I didn't know in my formative years was how the need for specificity is imposed upon us from the career aspect. I just thought, oh, I could play the piano, I could sing, I could be a conductor, I could do all of these things, and I did, and I did. But in terms of, with very few exceptions, very few exceptions, uh, with conducting, it's almost it's it's really almost a necessity that you turn your mind towards that almost exclusively and use what you know about singing, use what you know about piano playing, use what you know about. I was concert master of my junior high orchestra. Use what you know about string playing, and these peripheral expertises help feed a greater comfort level and a greater degree of fluidity and with conducting. So I didn't know that at the time. I thought that I could do everything, and so I had a little bit of a singing career. I mean, tiny, not anything that you can talk about. Although I made a few recordings that you can find out there, some bootleg things, and but it really was my desire to be involved with as much music as I possibly could be involved with that made me decide to go almost exclusively into conducting. I mean, so for example, when I found out that I could sing as a teenager, I thought, oh my goodness, I can just sing all this. But we are all restricted, as you know. You're a bass player. Okay, well, you love playing bass. That doesn't mean you can play clarinet. Um, so what that means is that you're kind of restricted to the bass clef, occasionally wandering up into to the treble clef. But we have restrictions with our instruments, okay, that keep us from being able to express ourselves the same way a flute player would. Um, as a singer, I was a lyric baritone. Nothing wrong with being a lyric baritone, but I also wanted to be Wotan. I wanted to be Rigoletto. I also wanted to be, Pavarotti, who was a tenor. I wanted to do so many things, and as a singer, that I realized, you know what, I can't be all things to all people, or all things to myself, even as a singer, because I am restricted um, by my instrument. And I don't mean restricted in a negative sense. It's just from a scientific sense. Like a piano isn't an organ. And so I decided, well, conducting. If I really concentrate on finding opportunities to conduct, I can conduct anything and anyone. I can conduct Wotan. I can conduct Rigoletto. I can conduct La Boheme. I can conduct Symphony Fantastique. I can conduct Mahler 4. I can do all of these things that are outside the purview of merely being a singer or merely being a pianist or merely being a violinist. And so I tell everybody, conducting is an enormous privilege. Serena can tell you that there's nothing like the privilege of conducting. Commensurate with that privilege is a responsibility. And that responsibility is all encompassing in terms of preparation, in terms of your respect for other musicians, and respect for the audience. There are no stones. You never run out of stones to turn in preparing for a piece, whether it's a comparatively on the page difficult piece or comparatively on the page simple piece. The preparation is ongoing, and it's happening while you're doing it. The number one word for a conductor is prepare. This is a big picture thing. It's a small picture thing. At the top of my score for La Boheme, which has an opening just like Beethoven 5. How do you do Beethoven 5? Books have been written about how you do the very first, bars of Beethoven 5. You could write the same thing about La Boheme. It's the exact same thing. Ba-dum bum bum, as opposed to bum 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 bum. Well, that wasn't bum 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 bum. It's all the same kind, but everything is involved in preparation. Not only preparing the whole score, but preparing every single beat for the next thing. Preparation. That is the totality of what conducting is from a technical standpoint, and it's endless. It's absolutely endless. So you have to prepare emotionally. You have to prepare the emotional aspect of what you're doing. So anyway, we could talk about this forever, but I'll let you ask your next question.
No, I love the idea of wanting. It's that. I totally understand that there are so many gorgeous, powerful, phenomenal, fun things. This week we're doing Prokofiev 5.
I know. I can't wait. I'm coming tonight to the concert.
Oh, it's Serena knows I just lose my mind over this work. And it's because every person on the stage gets to do something cool. And so this vicarious listening to the low brass section, listening to our new principal tuba, Seth Carter, just sound magnificent. Listening to the percussion section, this feeling of like, oh, in my dream of dreams, I would get to try all of these things.
Mhm.
But I love the idea of living vicariously through that by helping everybody else do those things together and just being able to be like awash in that sound. Do you have, when you, I guess the question is, do you ever let yourself feel that during your performance, or is it after the fact that you take
No,
in? Yeah.
no, that's a wonderful question and a wonderful observation. The most beautiful word in music is ensemble, which means together. And particularly as a conductor, we have lots of jobs. We have lots of jobs we shape, but our principal job is to make sure that we have ensemble, and that we are together, and that feeling of making music that in an ensemble. And that doesn't mean just merely being together in terms of playing, but feeling together in terms of the emotional sweep of a piece of music. Coffee of Five is one of the 10 greatest symphonies ever written, in my view, and I can't wait to hear it. And Joe is a friend of mine, so I look forward to seeing Joe conduct. But yes, of course, it is both in the moment and afterwards. I do not step on the podium either for a performance or a rehearsal without thinking, my goodness, I need to be in the moment, because things will happen in a rehearsal that may not ever happen in a performance. Wonderful things, incredible things that you may never realize in a performance. But that's part of your personal reward. That's something that people cannot take from you. The time and experience that one has making music with other people is something that no one can take away from you if you relish the moment. And then, there are times when I realize something is absolutely magical, and I'm just enthralled in the moment, and I do the final downbeat, and I'm walking to go take a bow, and I say, I'm so excited. I can't wait to think about that. I can't wait to think about this evening, and I, go out and have some dinner, and then just sit down and think how grateful I am to have had this experience, and how grateful I am to have that it was so meaningful, that not only in the moment was I enthralled and the musicians were enthralled, but now I can sit back and relive it in my own mind and just thank God that I was in that position to experience that. I mean, music has that ability to do things, and we talk about it being a universal language. It's also a universal uniter. We can have people that have political, religious, all kinds of differences, personal differences, and everything. But the idea of coming together, I like to think that we might be different people with different ideas, but in this moment of making music, we're all on the same team, and we all believe in what we have to offer. We believe in the efficacy and the power, the salvific. That sounds like an exaggeration. No, the music has the ability to save people. Music is like a drug to me. There are drugs that will kill you. There is music that if it's poorly done, it can be unsettling, and it's not efficacious if it's not done well. If music is used cynically, for example. But there's music that can save you, can save your life if it gives you just an ounce of joy and an ounce of awareness of something beyond the routine.
And I think that's true, even if I think when we talk about that, our minds probably go to the most beautiful pieces of music ever written, or the most glorious, the most happy, the most upbeat. But the reality is that can be also true of things like Susannah, which is
Yes.
obviously opera tends to wrestle with some of the most heartbreaking stories across the board. How often does the soprano not make it to the end of the opera, where she's, it's
Yeah.
Carmen and she's 3 bars from the end and there she goes, right? But
Right.
Susannah, it's like you have this subject matter that is horrifying in so many degrees. The tension, the absolute ratcheting up of watching people go against each other, and yet there are moments of beauty in this opera. There are moments of humanity that are so much larger, I think, than we think we can handle. And Floyd manages to put it down on the page. And so we are fortunate to be able to play music like this as a
Yes.
reminder that despite
everything bad. There are moments where humanity can rise to the occasion, even in this particular plot. And so how do you start to wrap your head around the emotional tackling and the physical tackling of an opera like Susannah?
Well, Susannah it really is an amazing piece. First of all, you have to realize that Floyd was 27 years old and 28 years old when he was premiered. Now, when you think about that, I mean, that's amazingly young. You know, we think of Mozart, and we think about, the things that he accomplished when he was young. And yes, his Minuet in F, which he wrote when he was 5 and which I played when I was 5. But when Mozart was 28, he had yet to write the Nozze di Figaro. He had yet to write Don Giovanni. He had yet to write Così fan tutte. He had yet to write La Clemenza di Tito or The Magic Flute or The Last Symphonies, or even Eine kleine Nachtmusik. Okay, and yet Floyd wrote this great piece when he was younger than Mozart was when he wrote those operas, and is considered to be his masterpiece and the piece that for which he is most recognized and most beloved. You can also look, Floyd lived to be 95 years old. I mean, the reason, not the only reason, but one of the reasons we're doing it this year is because we're celebrating his 100th birthday. He was born in 1926. When you think of other old composers, my mind goes immediately to Heinrich Schütz, who didn't write any operas, and Giuseppe Verdi. Okay, well, we all know, Verdi, who wrote a vast number and the most influential operas in the Italian literature. Born the same year as Wagner, 1813, lived all the way to 1901. You cannot name an opera by Giuseppe Verdi. Very few people can, I should say, that he wrote by the time he was 28. He'd only written 2 operas, Oberto and Un Giorno di Regno, operas that are no longer performed. But this was long before Rigoletto, La Traviata, even his early successes like Nabucco, which was his first great success, and Ernani, not to speak of all the operas that came after. He wrote after he was 28. I say that only to emphasize the fact that what Floyd was able to accomplish in this piece is truly remarkable. So you're asking me about the dark aspect of this. Floyd does it masterfully. The piece itself it's 2 acts with 5 scenes, very well balanced. They're very taut. There's nothing that lingers. And as dark and foreboding as much of the opera is, it's almost an American verismo opera. And we can talk more about that. There are these moments of incredible beauty. There are 3 masterpieces in this opera. If I could, select the pieces in this opera that are you'd have to consider as masterpieces. The first one is the one that's most well known. It's the soprano Susannah's aria "Ain't It a Pretty Night," which is in the second scene, and it's one of the most beautiful pieces that there is, in the operatic literature. Everyone. All sopranos are aware of it. Everyone sings it. And it's actually the piece with which most people are familiar with Susannah. And everything about it from the beginning, the atmosphere, from the orchestration, from the text, it's poetic, it's beautiful, but yet it has this folk-like quality and that really is evocative of the Appalachian spirit. Richard Strauss famously said that, he could write something that sounds like scrambled eggs. Well, I mean, and that's the kind of composer he was. He could make anything apparent in music and in sound. I am incredibly impressed with what Floyd has been able to do, particularly in this first aria, "Ain't It a Pretty Night," where you can just feel the stars, you can feel the atmosphere, you can feel the air in this. It's incredibly beautiful. And she has moments where she said, I want to, in this aria, where I want to get out beyond these mountains and see what there is in the world. And you feel in the brass, the way he's written for the brass, sort of a foreboding kind of impending darkness as darkness creeps in on the valley. It's amazing. I mean, it really is truly, in terms of tone painting, it's marvelous. The other great masterpiece for her is The Trees on the Mountain, which she sings in the second act. And as most people know about this piece, Susannah, a lot of it sounds like folk music. In fact, some of the early pieces, the early criticism, it was called a folk opera. Well, it's not a folk opera. With great sophistication, Carlisle Floyd makes much of the opera sound as if it comes from folk sources, but all of it's original. And The Trees on the Mountain sounds like it has been around forever. It sounds like an ancient, beautiful folk song that was born in the hills, after having been brought over from the British Isles, like all great Appalachian folk music has its roots in the British Isles. That's what it sounds like its roots are, but it's freely composed. It's incredibly beautiful. The text is beautiful. But yet it's a sophisticated aria with a couple of high C's. It's not easily sung. So it is this beautiful innocence and naivete, but with tremendous sophistication and technical demands. The other really imposing, masterful moment in this piece is the revival scene, where the bass, Olin Blitch, and then the congregation, where much of the drama takes place. I don't necessarily want to go into it. I want people to come see it. It's incredible. But the way he wrote, the only other thing that I can think of that is comparable is the auto de fe scene in Don Carlo. I know that sounds like a tremendous exaggeration, but it's the same kind of thing, where the dramatic power and terrifying power of the drama is so incredibly on display in the music. The congregation is singing what sound like old-time revival hymns, like perhaps even in shape note kinds of things. But they're not. They're original with Carlisle Floyd, but they have that modality and that feel. The Blitch, the preacher, I mean, he sounds everything he does is exactly what you sort of would expect that kind of revivalist preacher to be doing, both in terms of what he is saying and how he is saying it. And then there are moments in the orchestra where he says, one of the things he says, are you going to be spending eternity in heaven, or are you going to be spending eternity in hell? And you hear hell in the orchestra. You really do. You've got glissandi going on in the violins, and you've got, so it is, this is the thing that I come back to with this piece, and my awe for the composer. I met Carlisle Floyd several times. My wife sang several of his operas, and I had occasion to meet him a number of times, and just a wonderful elder statesman of opera. But for me to think about how this young man, who wasn't really a known composer, he was a pianist. He wrote this when he was a piano teacher at Florida State University, but had an interest in writing opera. It's almost like a native genius that he's able to do this, and the orchestration is so evocative. Anyway, I could go on, but in terms of how one prepares for the totality of the piece, in terms of the darkness of it, it's very much a process in the staging. There are all kinds of conversations. Our stage director here at Opera Omaha is Patricia Rissette, who herself has sung the role, and who herself is a celebrated, great singer, and also really well known for her ability to bring roles alive on the stage. And she's now been directing for several years, and the conversations that she and our principal soprano have had about the thrust and direction of this story. I mean, these are the kinds of things that are ever present in our modern life. Yes, it's an ancient story. We were talking about that. How I like to say this story is as old as sin itself. I mean, it's been with us, and yet it's also thematically it is present with us at this very day. And so I'm very grateful for the fact that both Patricia, our director, and Caitlin, our Susannah, they want to make it very clear, particularly to women in the audience, that Susannah was in a position over which she had no choice, and she was wronged. She was wronged terribly, and there's nothing she could have done to prevent it. She's a complete and total victim. The other thing that I think is important to realize is that while this is in a religious setting, obviously, and it highlights religious hypocrisy, and it highlights the disastrous ends that come about by mob mentality. It is not in my view, certainly, it is not an attack on religion itself. And I've wanted to make it clear with folks. I myself am a devout Christian, and as I know many folks are, whether this is not an attack on religious beliefs. This is an attack on mob mentality, judgmentalism, and toxic masculinity, the kinds of things that we have in and out of religion. We have it in all areas of society. So I want to be clear about that this to me is not an attack on religion. One of the things, he wrote this at a time of McCarthyism. We all know about the climate in America politically, and from a societal standpoint at those times. And without saying that, we're writing this opera because of that, it was written at that time, and he didn't back away from that. But that was a political environment. McCarthyism was political, not so much religious. It's just that this particular story, which has been with us, as I say, from the very beginnings of time, it is applicable in so many different ways. And one of the reasons I believe that Carlisle Floyd decided to put this in rural Appalachia is because it was able to bring it home and bring it to an area where that I think so many Americans could identify with. And his use of folk-like material, his use of the atmospheric and from a dramaturgical standpoint, things that people have experienced in their own lives. I think it drives it home in a tremendously meaningful way. It's a profound piece. It's a difficult piece. There are moments of great sublime joy, and moments of tremendous squalor, which is one of the reasons why I like to call it an American verismo opera. We think of verismo as things like Pagliacci and Tosca, where the realism turns brutal, and that's what verismo is. The life of ordinary people, and this is the life of an ordinary young woman and her brother, and in this ordinary community of New Hope Valley in Tennessee, and yet it has this very, very difficult outcome.
It's really also telling that he chose, when you have all these operas that are set in castles or fantasy lands or massive cities or on adventures, like he chose this small town. And like, these are the places we seclude ourselves and decide that we are safe. And the reality is
right.
That's not necessarily true.
It's the human condition. There are. I used to live in an area that people used to think, oh, you live in the most marvelous place. Well, if I had lots of money and my circumstances were better, I'd love it. But because I was at the time comparatively impoverished, and my circumstances weren't great, it was hell on earth. And so there's so much. There's so much to learn through pieces like this, and to me, that's what great music does. That's what great art does. Art in the most broad sense. If it doesn't prod you to reflect on your own condition and your own relationship with the world and others, and that can be very vague or it can be very specific. But that's what art does. Art is what separates us from animals. I mean, we hear birds singing and we think, oh, that's music. Well, that's how birds communicate. We imitate birds and it becomes music. Um, and we as human beings, is one of the things that makes us human beings, is our abilities to have ideas, not merely instinct. We have instinct, but we have ideas which we develop and which we consider. We consider ourselves, and art is the most, I think, one of the most effective ways of considering ourselves. And that's what this opera does, I think, very effectively.
Patrick, so I found this great quote. Patrick Summer
Yeah.
said that
Yeah.
Floyd made it okay to tell American stories in an American voice. And so I'm curious, because you conduct, your repertoire is huge. Do you feel like the phrase American opera still has, I don't want to say a negative connotation, but like that American opera still has a ways to go reputation wise to compete with how old the art form is, say, in Europe?
Perhaps, apart from Porgy and Bess, which was written in the 30s, and then around the same time, Kurt Weill wrote Street Scene, which I interestingly I conducted this fall, and these are some of the Porgy and Bess, Street Scene, and Susannah are considered some of the seminal works in American opera, and of course a whole lot of opera, American opera, is being written now, and in subsequent years, Jake Heggie has become very, very well known, and the Metropolitan Opera, the world's the opera house with the biggest budget, they've started to be commissioning new works. But yes, to answer your question, it still has a long way to go for to be universally, not so much accepted, but universally treasured. We treasure Verdi and Puccini, and even when some are tired of Verdi and Puccini, we're tired of treasuring it. Okay, and that's very much of the conversation. An interesting story. The very first time I conducted anything from Susannah was 20 something years ago. My wife and I were with the Philharmonia Orchestra in London. The Philharmonia Orchestra is the most recorded orchestra in the history of the world, and it's a great, great orchestra. But we were doing a recording of arias in English. Chandos, the recording company, arias in English, and they asked Elizabeth, my wife, Elizabeth Futrell, if let's do something. I said, why don't let's do Ain't It a Pretty Night? I said, let's do that. So we got there to record Ain't It a Pretty Night, and the Philharmonia Orchestra, which I say they're familiar with all literature. We got through rehearsing it and to get ready to record it, and I could tell there was something going on, and my concert master said, Maestro, before, why haven't we heard this music before? I said, well, I can't say exactly why you haven't heard this music before. He goes, this is incredibly beautiful, and we recorded it, and that recording is available. You can find it if you look up Elizabeth Futrell, or just my name, which might be easier to remember, Stephen White, and look up Ain't It a Pretty Night. You can find that recording on whatever sources there are. After recording, he said, so this Carlisle Floyd, he must be your greatest opera composer in America, right? I said, well, maybe he is. It could very well be. But American opera has been long. It's taken a long time for American opera to become popular in the grand spaces of Europe and beyond that have been so associated with traditional opera. But it's making continuous headway, and but he is absolutely correct, Patrick. When giving permission to to composers to sound American. One thing that when you study the score, Susannah, you realize that it's not merely simple folk-like music. There's tremendous sophistication there. There's polytonality. You've got places. You'd find this interesting, Dani, that you and the cellos would be playing in one key, literally with, say, 3 sharps in your key signature, while the violins and violas are playing in another key with 4 flats or something like that. How often does that happen in a score like that? And not very often. There is a tremendous amount of polyphony going on in the piece, and the thing that I find very interesting in my with the score is that there is so much of what we like to call leitmotif that we associate with Wagner, and in the overture, the overture tells the entire story almost through all these leitmotifs. But then the way he uses and develops the complete and total academic sophistication. That Stravinsky wouldn't have been ashamed of. The Hindemith wouldn't have been ashamed of. So he does something very special. There are moments that sound like Copland. But there are moments that sound, as I say, like Hindemith. All of it in service to this really important story and in service to the atmosphere. There's never a moment where the music is going in a different direction than the atmosphere of the story. And like I say, this is a gift that he must have been born with, because he didn't have this great development period of writing many things. He experimented with a couple of shorter operas that never really made it to the stage. This is his first important work, and it comes out like Minerva springing from the brain of Jove. And it's pretty great.
Do you, when you're returning to an opera company or a symphony, and you have a piece on the stand that you've played maybe with some of the orchestra, but not the entire orchestra,
right?
Do you say anything at the top, or do you let the music speak for itself for a while and then you start guiding in whatever direction it needs to go?
The latter is always the better choice. But sometimes we can't help ourselves to say a few things. But I try to keep it minimal and but if we know there are things in the score that people need a heads up, or if I'm going to do something technically that might look different than what's in the score, I'm going to be an 8 in this passage just to warn you, or whatever. There are some few things, but I think it's much better, and an orchestra is much more appreciate allowing it to unfold on its own terms with them, and what I love about that is that it puts more emphasis on your chops. Anyone can accomplish anything with lots of rehearsal. It's what you can accomplish with little rehearsal, where really you have to show as much. You have to trust the orchestra to respond to what you're doing physically, and they have to trust you to make that you're making it worth their while to watch. Conductors that say, I'm being clear, you got to follow me. I mean, that's the worst thing you can say. If you tell someone you're being clear, and well, apparently maybe you think you're being clear, but it's a matter of trust, and I like to try not to say too terribly much, and always I'm a little bit perturbed myself when I do say too much. But I like to try to let the music do the talking, and allow us to have this conversation. I, of course, know things that they don't know. I know that the soprano has to take a breath there. I, of course, know that we have to move this tempo there, and all of these things. I have to show that. I would rather show that first than tell them, by the way, we're doing a fermata here. If they and once they learn to trust me, I think the more trust there is, the less talking there has to be. And I think any conductor would tell you the same thing.
How do you divide your attention in any production between the singers and what they need, and the orchestra and what they need? Or is the preparation from go even in the rehearsals where you only have the orchestra, are you mentally still thinking, on stage, Susannah will be over here and Little Bat will be over here? And
absolutely. One of the great advantages, and this is one of the things that I think conductors that don't get to conduct opera productions, I think one of the great values of conducting opera, one of the things that makes it easier in a certain sense. Conducting opera is not easy, but the process of working with with singers for 2 weeks beforehand is the kind where I get to know. And you ask me that person coming in on stage left or whatever. Yes, that whole time I'm making notes. I'm taking, okay, my soprano needs this, my chorus needs that. Oh, they're far up stage. I'm going to really have to bring the dynamics down here. I have a wealth of information that I have gleaned from 2 weeks worth of working in the staging rehearsals. I'm also telling the singers at this point, by the way, the oboe is this, you hear this on the piano right now, but it's actually going to be an oboe solo, and it's going to be this, or it's going to be that. And so I try during that process to let the singers know exactly what the orchestra is doing. When I get to my first orchestra reads, I have the confidence of knowing what I need to accomplish with them based on what I've already established with the singers. And when I say this is the kind of thing that is helpful for conductors, if you're going to go to the London Symphony and conduct, the Royal Symphony, you don't have to teach it to them. But you know what? If you're going to the London Symphony, you're going to do Susannah or any other opera, you're going to have to, teach is the wrong word, but you're going to have to guide them through the things that you know that they don't know. Doesn't mean that they're not smart, but they haven't been sitting in these rehearsals for 3 weeks. And that, because one of the things that young conductors in particular find challenging sometimes, listen, we got a really good orchestra that really plays this music really well out of the box. How do I rehearse it? How do I make it my own? This is such a wonderful tool as a developing conductor to learn that, okay, I've got to make it my own in the sense that I've got to tell them to do things dramatically that aren't necessarily the score, but are required. You make that transition to Beethoven's Eroica Symphony, suddenly you think, wait a minute, this is how I'm going to pretend I'm a soprano on the stage. And this is how I want Beethoven's Eroica to go. And the orchestra doesn't know that. And you can insist on this voice in your mind in a way that brings you confidence in it. And so I've found that the operatic process has always been so helpful for me, even when I'm rehearsing non-operatic music with an orchestra, because it gives me confidence to be able to bring an orchestra into the direction that I feel compelled. And so it's I encourage any conductor to get that operatic experience, because I think it opens up a whole avenue of methodology and confidence in terms of working with orchestras.
What would you recommend following Susannah for anyone who's attending, and this is their first opera, or this is their first dramatic opera as opposed to something like Barbarossa? What would you recommend they follow it up with?
Hansel and Gretel is a masterpiece fit for any audience, and it is not just a fairy tale. It's not just a children's story. It's got moments of darkness, nothing as severe as this, but witches eating children is not necessarily, witches trying to eat children, I should say, is not necessarily easy. And then, La Boheme is how you can't go wrong with La Boheme. I've conducted La Boheme a million times and it never goes. And I always, when I get those C sharp minor chords at the end of the opera, I always cry. Always in performance, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. There are so many great operas. La Traviata is a great opera. There are so many, but I think from a family standpoint, Hansel and Gretel is such a sophisticated masterpiece of an orchestral piece. It's almost like a Strauss tone poem in certain respects. It sounds equally. It's of course Humperdinck, but we don't know that much about Humperdinck, in terms of a big thing. But so what I tell people is it sounds like Wagner and Strauss and Mahler got together and decided to write a joint tone poem, and we have Hansel and Gretel. It's incredibly beautiful.
Last question for you. If you had 30 minutes on stage, no consequences, you could do anything, try any instrument, sing any aria, play with the rigging, What are you trying?
Oh my Lord. Well, there's so. I mean, I guess I'll have to confine it to things that I want to do. It would take more than 30 minutes, but I want to do the Missa Solemnis more than I want to get up in the morning. Okay. I mean, the Missa Solemnis to me is the one piece that if you put, a gun to my head and said, what is the one piece you want to conduct? The thing about the Missa Solemnis is that it isn't that rarefied. Of course, we all know it's a great piece, but it is also known as being almost unperformable. And it's that almost, which is the exhilarating challenge. It's that music of the spheres that and the Missa Solemnis. If I had to have 30 minutes, I guess what I would do is I would do the portion of the Missa Solemnis that perhaps speaks to me the most, which is the Benedictus, which is basically, I've actually had a conversation, I think, with Susannah about this. It's a violin concerto in the middle of this of this great orchestra. I mean, a great choral work, liturgical choral work, and it's the most sublime piece of music ever written. And it's the extended Benedictus with the violin solo and all the four soloists in the chorus. It's unbelievable. It is truly music of the spheres.
Well, our Susannah, I know, also wants to play the Beethoven Missa Solemnis. So
yes, I want to do it with her.
She's gonna. I'm imagining this is going to be a fun week for her, hearing the name Susannah over and over and over and over again. We get the pick.
But of course, we've made the point that she's actually Susannah, as in as spelled the same way as Mozart's Susannah. So, just that clarification.
Perfection. Maestro, thank you very, very much.
I've had the best time talking with you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm so excited for everything that you said. I'm so excited to hear Susannah, and I'm so excited for the rest of the day today. You've brought so much this joy and excitement for music that I can't wait to enjoy
I appreciate
the rest of
it. I mean, I hope I made sense. I assume that you identify with lots of what I was talking about.
Yes.
And it really is a joy to be a conductor. I mean, it's just, I have to pinch myself, and I'm 63 years old. I've been doing this for a long time, and I just can't imagine anything I would rather do. It's just the most marvelous thing there is. So I know you've got years and years and decades of the same experience.
I hope so. I loved how you described how all-encompassing it is. That is such a difficult thing to describe if you've never done it. I know Dani has also done some conducting, and so she understands as well. But just like it is so all-consuming, and it's the most exhilarating experience.
Well, like I do think that some conductors lose. They know it, but they lose that relationship between the privilege and the responsibility, I think that those two things need to be coincidental at all times when you're thinking as a conductor and everything else. So I think the best ones do have that, but sometimes we can. By being humbled by the people around you, not the least of which is the composer on the page. I ain't no Mozart. I ain't no Carlisle Floyd. I ain't no Susannah Perry Gilmore. I'm not a Paul LeDuan. I'm not Serena. I'm not anybody else. I'm not Dani. Mm-hmm. I'm humbled by the skills and the privilege of bringing all of these musicians, many of whom might be a better musician than you are, but they are putting aside their own personality to the extent that they're willing to submit themselves to a unifying idea, which is supposed to be represented by you, the conductor. And you're the person in charge of having that unified idea. That's unbelievable. And a good conductor will reach out to get further information so that we can find more information to make that unifying idea efficacious to all of us. So it's just huge. But I will say that if you don't love the music, don't do it. I've one of the things that not all music speaks to me. Equally. And I've been fortunate that I've been able to work. And then in classical music, generally speaking, we work with masterpieces. You can debate whether the Hofner Symphony is as great as the 41st Symphony. Okay, well, that's a ridiculous debate. They're both incredible. And we get to spend our lives with these great masterpieces. People ask me, "Oh, what's it like to have to, conduct La Boheme over and over again?" A lot better than having to conduct Rent over and over again, or something. And I don't say that to them, but I don't want to make any. I don't want to make fun of or let anyone think that I don't think well of their musical taste, because music is a lot about taste. But in our field, we get to work with masterpieces. We get. I mean, every time I even pronounce the word Schubert, I'm in awe. It's incredible. Call me naive, but if you don't have that love of the music itself, and a respect for the geniuses that wrote it, and for the geniuses today who are performing it, the geniuses who are writing it and who never get performed, I'm so glad we're starting to make some progress with women, and starting to make some progress with the non-traditional white men. There's so much great music. Music is infinite. There are no boundaries on what music can be. The only boundaries on what music can be is how well it's put together, and how well it's performed, and the commitment. Anyway, I've got to run have lunch with Allison Swenson. So
great.
Hey.
We're keeping that in, by the way. That was marvelous. So this is where we will end it.
Okay. Hey, listen, Serena, come see me if you come over.